Um, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Garden Design for Natural Habitat webinar. My name is Michaela Camellamella, and I'm the Sustainability Specialist at the City of Menlo Park, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. So some things to note during today's Zoom webinar: all attendees will be muted by default. The instructor will pause periodically for questions. Audience questions are encouraged, so 2 ways you can ask. You can either raise your hand by clicking that button down below, or you can type your questions in the Q&A box down there. And there's nobody here, but just thought I would read off the slides anyway. And we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. And the webinar is being recorded and will be made available to everybody in the next coming weeks. So a little bit about BOSCA. BOSCA represents 26 agencies that include cities, water districts, a water company, and a university that purchase water wholesale from the San Francisco Regional Water System. The BOSCA member agencies provide water to 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. So BOSCA's goal is to provide high quality supply of water at a fair price. So the purpose of this webinar is to encourage Bay Area residents to decrease their outdoor water usage, particularly through irrigating their grass. So outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the BOSCA service area. And outdoor water use reduction through the use of water-efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that the future water supply needs of our communities are met. So the most popular rebate that BOSCA offers is the Lawn Be Gone rebate, which can vary from each member agency. The City of Menlo Park offers its water customers $3 per square foot for converting grass lawn to drought-tolerant plants, and an additional rebate of $200 for the purchase of rain barrels. So you can go to bayareagardening.org to learn more about garden transformations in the Bay Area. It also provides resources to support residents in water-efficient landscape renovations and management, and has a gallery of different gardens with plants identified and a plant selection tool, as well as a watering guide. So some additional rebates that BOSCA offers is a discounted rate for the purchase of a Regio Smart Controller irrigation system. So that allows you to manage irrigation from your smartphone and also lets you create tailored watering schedules and make automatic weather adjustments. There's also an optional rain garden rebate program where you can add to your Lawn Be Gone project and receive an additional $300 if you install a rain garden. So if you're a Santa Clara County resident, many of the same rebates are available through Valley Water, including the lawn replacement rebate. And you'll just need to visit the links listed here on this slide for more information on their rebates. You'll be able to apply to multiple rebates on the same application through Valley Water's platform as well. So for some more tips and resources, you can go to southbaygreengardens.org. You can also go to watersavings.org and watch informational videos. If you're a Santa Clara County resident, you can contact WaterWise at valleywater.org, and you can report water waste. So some additional upcoming webinars that you can register for at bosca.org/ conserve/program/classes. A bit of a long link there. So the next one will be increase habitat in gardens, which our instructor will also be presenting, I believe. So that'll be April 23rd at 6 p.m. and that one will also be online. There'll also be an in-up at Stanford on irrigation controller programming and summer irrigation, April 24th at 6 p.m. And then the City of Menlo Park is actually hosting the Water Efficient Edible Gardens workshop, and that'll be in person next Saturday, April 27th at 1 p.m. And then there's some more listed there if anyone is interested. And if you would like to view previously recorded webinars, you can visit the link there below. And yeah, so now I'd like to hand it off to Juanita Salisbury, who'll be our presenter for today. And I'll let you take over from here.
Thanks, Michaela. Share my screen here. There we go. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining and learning today about garden design for natural habitat. I am Juanita Salisbury. I am a California landscape architect with a degree also in biopsychology. And so I do a lot of these habitat gardens here in Palo Alto. And I have updates on what's happening in those gardens. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, also YouTube at Primrose Way. And if you don't like social media, I have a website, which is the primrosewaypollinatorgarden.com. As I mentioned, I do a number of pollinator gardens here in Palo Alto, and these are great places to see California native plants. These are always open. If you come in off of Highway 101 along Embarcadero Road here, we have the first garden that we did that was installed 8 years ago, the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. And we're connecting that garden along the Embarcadero Road Pollinator Corridor Project to the Gwynda Street Garden. We have the Hopkins Avenue Garden, Arcadia Place Garden, Island Drive Garden, Churchill Street Garden, and the West Greenwich Place Pollinator Garden. So lots of different kinds of places for plants and just some really great plants in those gardens to look at and to see what they look like out there in the natural environment. So I'm going to talk in some broad strokes. I'm going to talk about planning. It's always good to kind of know what you're doing ahead of time. Some things about planting and then about maintaining. And it's all tied together in terms of how to get the most optimal water use out of your garden. And these slides feature many of the photographs that I take. I've been monitoring these gardens for the last 8 years, about once a week for the last 8 years. So I have lots and lots of observations. So I know what works, what uses little water, and what really helps to preserve biodiversity. One of the first things in any sort of design is you need to think about things. And one of the first questions to ask yourself is, do you need a lawn? Okay, and as a designer, and we're talking about design here, form follows function. So in your garden, and I can't tell you the answer to this question. This is a question that you have to ask yourself. How will you use the area? Consider where you walk, where you sit, places where you're going to plant, where you're going to play, and so forth. So this is a personal consideration. So think about what your needs are. What are your goals in terms of how you're going to use an area? If you're getting rid of that lawn, there's an easy way to do it. And so in your planning, plan to get rid of that lawn. And this is from stopwaste.org. And it talks about how to sheet mulch to get rid of your lawn or to transform it into a garden. And instead of digging it up and spraying it with herbicides, this is a lot of work. Less work is to place a layer of cardboard on top of the grass, and that smothers it. Then you place layers of compost and mulch on top of that. The grass will decompose and feed the soil. And then the great thing is that you can plant right away through the cardboard. And this smothers the weeds as well. And so it's just a really easy way to transform a space or to create a blank canvas. So again, think about function. Remember, form follows function. To me as a designer, I'm always looking to be the best designer I can be. And so what has really informed my design choices over the past has been function. And what do you need your plants to do? So what are their functions? Are they going to create shade for you? Do you need some shade? Do you need screening? Do you not want to look at some things that you would like to rather look at some plants instead? Do you need a windbreak? Do you have a lot of gusty wind that's really annoying? Do you want a ground cover to replace your lawn that's less maintenance, green? Do you want an accent plant? Do you want something very simple that is attractive? So consider the function of what you need in that space. You know, what do you need? What do you want to achieve? What are your goals? And that will inform your design decisions. Think about the attributes of plants. You want to use those low water using, money saving plants, the plants that use very little water. Do you want things that are low maintenance? I don't know anybody who really wishes for high maintenance, so low maintenance is good. Do you want things that are long lived? So there are different lifespans of plants. Do you want your garden to smell good? Do you want certain colors in your garden? Do you want a very vibrant garden with lots of reds and yellows and oranges, the warmer colors? Or do you want something cool and tranquil with the blues, the greens, and the purples? Do you want to use texture in interesting ways? Do you want something that's, really boldly textured, big, fat, chunky leaves? Or do you want something that has finer, more fine textured leaves? These are, again, personal considerations. What forms do you like? Do you want things that are more upright and narrow? Do you want rounded shrubs? Do you want things that are spreading? Or maybe things that are vase shaped? Again, these are personal decisions that you need to think about. So, in terms of planning, ask yourself these questions: functions and attributes. What do I need it to do? And what do I want personally? What are those qualities that I like? Again, what are your goals? For me as a landscape architect and a designer, my design goals, even though I design things that I think are elegant and beautiful, I also design for abundance and optimization in terms of water use. And so, do you want to have, in your habitat garden, do you want to see more butterflies? Do you want to see more bumblebees? Consider these questions. These are personal questions. What do you see as the end that you want to achieve here? The good thing to help you achieve your goals is that California is a biodiversity hotspot. What does that mean? That means that we have a lot of different types of life here that, in terms of abundance and diversity, our biodiversity hotspot in California is about one of only about 30 on the entire planet. So we have a lot to choose from in terms of species of plants, some that are found nowhere else on the planet, more than any other state in the United States. And those provide abundant ecological benefits. It supports wildlife as well as pollinators and other insects. And in terms of water conservation, many species are drought tolerant. And in other things that they do for water conservation, which I'll mention in the habitat function of these plants, they do some interesting things in terms of helping us conserve water. And the plants are good for insect species. And if you want to help the basis of life on the planet, which 37% of the animal species on the planet are insects. And so we want to preserve life on the planet. And we know that insect species, including pollinators, are declining worldwide. And in some areas of the world, insect species have declined up to 70%. So what can we do to turn that around? And here are some pictures of insects using the different types of plants that I've planted over the years, showing that they do like the things that I plant. And so I'm going to talk about some of those, how to use those in designs to get the most optimal use out of them. So one of the go-to places to get really great information about native plants is this website, calscape.org. This is done by the California Native Plant Society, and they have information about what Calscape does, nurseries where you can find plants, design and inspiration, where I've taken a screenshot here, a section on butterflies, and then plant lists. So you can create a spreadsheet within the program so that you can have a handy list of things in order to uh, keep track of what you have planted and when they bloom and those sorts of things. And so I took a screenshot of this because it really shows, it really speaks to irrigation, which is on everybody's minds these days, how plants like oaks, reaching down into the deep moisture in the soil with those tap roots, pulling it up, and then with their lateral surface roots, spreading water to other areas and other plants. So these trees support lots of other types of life. So that's something to keep in mind to really get your garden started in terms of design. First thing, consider planting some trees. So, and we'll talk more about trees in a moment, but this is such a great resource on that website. I highly recommend going there and taking a look. What you want to do is mimic nature in your gardens. So I like to design in a rain garden feature when I'm designing for clients. And here's a client who had redwood trees in their backyard, and we created just a very nice shallow swale for their downspouts. The plant roots that we know are around here, especially like redwoods, are pretty shallow, but other plant roots will grow toward moisture. Plant roots are very good at finding moisture. There have been very interesting studies about how plants are really aware of where the moisture is, and you can tell that they're aware of it by the way that their roots are growing right towards it. Um, and so this type of feature is functional as well as attractive. It becomes a nice feature in a garden. So you can, as you're designing your garden, before you even consider what to plant, remember form follows function. How do you want to use the area? Do you want to create a rain garden? Highly recommend it. It really helps with those irrigation needs. And your plant choices, when you're mimicking nature, should reflect the plant community indicated by the keystone plant species present. Here in this garden, it's those redwood trees. So what kinds of plants grow with redwoods? There's a lot of information about those different plant communities on the Calscape website. So your plant choices should reflect the keystone species that you have there. What are those trees? Do you have oaks? Do you have redwoods? Do you have maples? Do you have cherries? What grows with those things? Let's talk about keystone species. You want to start when you're picking plants for your design, you want to start with keystone species first. Let's talk about what those are. What is a keystone species? First, we're going to talk quickly about what to plant here. Back to Calscape again, um, you know, and they have all the information about plants. They don't list things as keystone species, but there's a way to find out what those are. And You can see that they have the list of the 7,984 plants native to California, and they break it down into trees, which is where you want to start. Shrubs is your second place to go, and then perennials and so forth. And you can look at what is locally native to your area. So you can actually put in an address and get a list of plants. So that narrows down your choices for you. So that's a very handy resource. Why are we planting California natives? Um, Non-native plants can escape cultivation and infest natural areas and destroy natural ecosystems and bring in diseases or exotic pests. Planting native, and here's a design feature, keeps California looking like California. And California native plants evolved to thrive in different California climates. And there are many native California species that are well adapted to hot, dry summers and wet winters. And these plants will be drought tolerant after they're established, which is about a year or two. So they don't take that long to establish. Now let's get into the keystone plant species. In general, what is a keystone species, both plant and animals? And a keystone species plays a pivotal role in an ecosystem. Without it, the entire ecosystem would be dramatically different or might even cease to exist. This goes for both plants and animals. That means that those species have a low functional redundancy, the big term for today, meaning that no other species can fully replace their ecological niche. And so the insight here is if you have multiple keystone species, not just one, but several, those are functioning as backups. So by having more keystone species in an environment provides high functional redundancy to protect ecosystem stability. So if one thing fails, you have several other plants or animal species, in this case plants, to help support that ecosystem and hold things together. So that just adds a lot of resiliency to your landscape. Why prioritize planting native keystone species? There are lots and lots of benefits to starting with those native keystone plant species. You have the first one is amplified impact. The keystone plant species have a disproportionate impact on the overall health and diversity of an ecosystem compared to their abundance. So even though you might have one or two keystone species in an environment, their effect is huge, even though you only have a few of them. And by planting those first, prioritizing those in the design, you jumpstart the development of a thriving habitat. Second, their adaptation skills. Many keystone plants are particularly well suited to the local environment. Planting them first allows them to establish themselves quickly, creating a foundation and fostering conditions suitable for other native species to thrive. So plant those first. They act kind of as nurse plants, helping other plants to establish. Connection. Keystone species act as connectors in the environment, creating a ripple effect of connections throughout the environment. And this is one of the key interesting points for me personally, because I think that their connections, we know this much about them, but I suspect that their connections are even more vast than we can imagine. This is just an idea that I have, but from what I can see, I think that this is a huge tool in the toolkit of using these keystone species. Number four is framework. They can create living physical structures and niches that benefit a variety of other plant and animal species. Time saving by planting those high impact species first, you maximize the ecological benefit sooner. So you don't waste time. You know that you're doing it right by planting keystones first. You leverage that power to create a network of ready-made connections. They're economical. You can achieve the maximal ecological benefits with limited resources and minimal effort. So you only need a few, and you don't have to spend very much money to plant two or three things. And scalability. This concept can be applied to gardens of all sizes. Even a single keystone species in a pot can actually affect the environment. So even just a pot size garden to large estate sizes and so forth. So lots of really good reasons to start with native keystones in your plant palette to begin with. So what's an easy way to know if a plant is a keystone species? Let's go back to considering a function. Plants are the primary producers of food and the basis of food webs. So what does that mean? Energy from the sun gets used by plants, which are eaten by insects, and then those insects are then eaten by other creatures. So basically, we are taking starlight and making baby birds. And this is how energy is transported into our food webs, into basically creating and sustaining life. And remember, I said 37% of animal species on the planet are plant-eating insects. And I mean, that's huge. That's a huge number. And as a rule, native insects only eat the native plants they evolved with. So if you're not planting native, you're not taking the sun's energy and providing uh, larvae for birds and other creatures in the environment. This is really the only way to transfer the sun's energy into the food web. And native plants do that because there are a lot of native insects here. Those native insects are hungry and they're not going to eat non-native plants. And there aren't enough non-native insects here in the United States, certainly not in California, to sustain bird populations. So there's, like I said, there's these ripple effects of the native plants. So the plants that efficiently channel the sun's energy into the food web in ways that other plants cannot are likely to be keystone species. And so what that means is that plants aren't decorations. I know here we're talking about design, but design is not just pretty things. It's actually considering, again, the function. Remember, form follows function. What are plants? Plants are food. That's their actual function. They can be decorative. They can have beautiful flowers. They can have a beautiful fragrance. They can have all those things, and those are certainly attributes to consider. But their main function is to take that starlight, the sunlight, and channel that into the food web. And so using those appropriate native plants will help the food webs to support an abundance of life. This means that your native plants will, guaranteed, attract many native pollinators, other insects, birds, and other organisms. And so, among other things, those keystone plants provide food for many more species than do other plants. There are plants like oaks, like cherry trees, like maples that provide food for hundreds, if not thousands, of insects. Some plants only provide food for a couple or a dozen. So some are better than others. The keystone species will provide food for many organisms. So that's one definition of a keystone plant species. Um, and Calscape, yay, Calscape, helps sort out which plants feed multiple species. And here's a screenshot of that, um, uh, the shrubs here. I just pulled up shrubs and I ordered it by the number of butterflies hosted. So to find out those plants that feed the most plants and then making decisions based on that and what it is you need the plants to do. Remember, we talked about planning. What is it that you wish to achieve in your design? And so they at the top of the list are willows, and willows do like to use more moisture, but if you plan appropriately, you can put a willow into your landscape. Um, but uh, that's another class for another time. The next ones that we have are oaks, and then it goes down into the cherries and the maples. So cowscape really helps. Another definition for those keystone species is done by the National Wildlife Federation. These are screenshots of a PDF, a couple of PDF pages that they provide. And this is the Mediterranean California Ecoregion 11. And they talk about that there are two types of keystone plants, the host plants that we talked about, and then the plants that feed specialist bees who only use one type of pollen to feed their young. So bees are vegetarians. They feed their offspring pollen. They make little loaves of nectar and pollen for them to eat. And some species only use a single type of the pollen. Other bees are called generalist bees. They will feed upon those plants just fine. They're not as picky as some. So, and then they break it down for you in terms of host plants, trees, shrubs, and so forth. So this is a great resource. It talks about all these plants um, that make it easy to decide what species to have in your garden and how you want to use those in your design. So here's Juanita's recommended species to start with in your design. And I like to go with the layers approach. Plant your trees first. Get those trees in there. If you have room, plant the oaks. If you can't get a big oak tree in your yard, go for a scrub oak, which is basically a shrub. If you have room for a maple, we have several different types of maples here. If you have space for a cherry tree, there's lots of different kinds of cherry trees that are super low water use. And if you're looking for screening purposes in your design, if you don't want to look at your neighbor's backyard because maybe there's a hole in the fence or maybe there's a power pole that you don't want to look at or a cell tower, just whatever it is. Here in my own backyard, I have Prunus ilicifolia, otherwise known as the holly leaf cherry. And this is evergreen, meaning it doesn't lose all its leaves at once. Here's some nice new light green growth coming out with the older, darker green and in full bloom. This is a great uh, screening tree, great in a side yard, super easy to take care of. Once it's established after about the first year, I don't water this plant at all. It does not like to be watered. So super easy to take care of. Um, in terms of design, has these nice glossy leaves, so it looks lush. It doesn't look dry. Even though you don't water it, looks green and juicy. And then once you've figured out where you want your plants, your trees, then you come in with your shrub layer. Okay, then these are my top picks for less work. The Arctostaphylos species, otherwise known as manzanitas, Ceanothus species, otherwise known as blue blossom, Eriogonum species, otherwise known as buckwheats. And it's not the same as the buckwheat pancake. This is why I don't like to use common names. I prefer scientific names. And then Baccharis, otherwise known as coyote bush. Within each of these genera, this is the genus name here, there are several different kinds of species that come in ground covers, shrub form, and tree form. And you can decide which one is going to fit into your design for your garden. Do you need a ground cover? Do you need shrubs? Do you need trees? And if you start with these are like almost foolproof trees and shrubs. Because of the amplified effects of the keystone plant species, you can simply start with just one of these in your design. We still have some time to plant before planting season is over. We have like maybe a couple, 2 or 3 weeks left before it's really too hot to plant. A good time to plant is starting in the fall, like October, November, so that you can take advantage of the rainy season with that cool, wet soil that makes it easier for the plants to establish. Uh, if you have room for an oak, No other trees come close to delivering all of the ecosystem services oaks provide. Here in the Santa Clara Valley, used to be 61% of the tree cover. Now it's 1%. As a keystone species, provides critical support to the entire ecosystem. Deciduous means it drops all its leaves each year, which you just leave under the tree to support the health of the tree. Really, anything that's going to be deciduous, you can just leave the leaves underneath those plants. Even if they fall on top of plants, you can just wait for the leaves to break down and then fall down into the plant. Plants make their own mulch and fertilizer that way. That's what they want to eat. They want to eat their own leaves. As I mentioned before, the taproots seek out the water table. Then those lateral surface roots share water with other plants. If you plant underneath, those native trees plant native, like something like Monardella species. These are insect factories transforming that sunlight into protein. They grow quickly. People say, oh, how fast? And surprisingly, oaks, once they're established after about 2 or 3 years, they can put on 3 or 4 feet a year. They can live up to 600 years and they add a lot of value to real estate. So um, if you have room in your design, in your yard for an oak tree, by all means, they're really great trees to have. But if you don't have room and you're asking yourself, what trees can I fit into my yard? If there are existing trees or not much space, and I have a very small yard, and here are a dozen examples from my tiny, tiny yard with an asterisk for top picks for drought tolerance. And even with more plants than last year, I'm still using about the same or maybe even a little less water than last summer. And so, because I'm always adding plants. Every year I can find space, even in my tiny yard, to add more plants. So these are some that I have. Acer macrophyllum, the big leaf maple. Cercocarpus betuloides. This is a great plant for part shade, sort of narrow and upright, so great for a side yard if you don't have much space. I even have a willow, and I barely water this thing, and she's still alive. Sambucus nigra, the elderberry. Again, that Prunus salicifolia. Look how shiny those leaves are. Acer negundo, the box elder. This is our street tree, the Modesto ash. Here I have Corylus cornuta, hazelnut. So I've got like two planted in my yard because two for cross pollination means I'm going to get some nuts. Prunus virginina. This is a different kind of cherry tree. So I've got like two cherries. This one's over here is evergreen. This one is deciduous. Arctostaphylos glauca. So this is one of those manzanitas that will eventually become a small tree. And I have Cercis occidentalis, which is the red bud. So this fixes nitrogen in the soil and really just provides a lot of showiness in the spring, has the great color of the flowers, the pink flowers coming out. And then we have our native toyon, the Heteromelies arbutifolia, super low water use. Once this is established, I have not watered this in the last 7 years. It just gets by on rainwater. So a lot of different choices in trees. But again, ask yourself in your design, what do you need the function to a step to? What are your goals? What do you need it to do? So if you want a shade tree, you know, what's going to work in terms of these trees for shade? So just a few ideas, lots to choose from. Now in our shrub layer, once we get our tree layer done, maybe you have trees already and you just want to jump into shrubs. One of my go-to shrubs that I love, love, love is the Arctostaphylos densiflora, Howard McMinn. They support 78 caterpillar species with 13 pollen specialist bee species. They also provide berries, nectar, and shelter for many other organisms. Hummingbirds love these. Supports bumblebee populations. So bumblebees come out in January, December, January, and February because bumblebees love the cooler weather. This is a great shrub for if you want a foundation plant. if you want something that's super low water use to like cover an area in your backyard. They're they're pretty sturdy plants once they're established. They're not bothered too much by dogs. So this is a great plant to use. They're evergreen, basically a carefree plant. One of my go-to shrubs. A nice mounding form on this. So if you like that color, if you're looking for this particular color of dark green glossy leaves that don't look all dry and nasty, if you don't want to have that desiccated look, and who does, this is a great shrub. Another great one that I really love are the Ceanothus species. This is a Ceanothus maritima, meaning it's a coastal species. This variety is called valley violet. Even though it's a cultivar, like the Howard McMinn Arctostaphylos, it still supports wildlife. And I know this because I see bumblebees on it. And I see that the leaves get chewed on, so it's being eaten by other things. So I do know that it's functioning as intended as food in the environment. I try to vet all the plants to make sure that they're functioning and they're not just sitting there rent free in the environment. They're actually paying their dues by supporting those organisms that they need to. It's a great plant, evergreen with blue blossoms starting in January. Very low water use, does not like water in the summer at all. Larval host for dozens of butterfly and moth species. So just a great plant all around, can grow in the sun. I give these a little bit of shade in the afternoon because the maritime stuff, because it grows out on the coast, likes a little shade in the afternoons. If you want to get rid of your lawn and your design calls for a ground cover, here's another ceanothus. This is not the maritima, but it's horizontalis, meaning it grows horizontally. This is a ground cover. Look how nice and uniform that is. If you want that nice uniform green cover, ground cover along, where your lawn used to be, this is a great alternative. It's powerfully drought tolerant, meaning you don't have to water this once it's established. Um, about 15 inches tall and spreading, nice blue blossoms, center shade, just a great choice, in your design. So you're going, okay, I've got an idea about like, I've got this big swath of land. And what I suggest to people, once you have those areas picked out for planting, after you've figured out the different functional areas, where you're going to do, if you haven't figured out hardscape and walkways and things like that, figure those out first. Those will define your planting areas. How do you plant in a planting area? You know, figure out, where you have to put something to block a view or to frame a view, and then, where those trees go in first. So measure that planting area, and you can use something like graph paper because it has a nice grid on it. And you can use those grids, those squares, each square can equal 1 foot. And that way you can draw in the plants at their mature diameter. So if something grows to be 2 feet in diameter, trust me, it will get that big. So you can like place them along planting in mass to create nice visual interest. And then just have those circles barely touching or slightly overlapping. And that will tell you in your design how many that you need. So you can create a little design. And I like to create masses of plants because unless I'm using an accent plant, something just for a pop of color, a really great way to get a real impact is to have a nice mass of plants that are, 3 feet in diameter or more. Um, and so that's how you know how many plants to get. So that's about 4 years of landscape architecture in one slide. So let's talk about those connections. Remember, I said I suspected that these are just the tip of the iceberg. So the plants and the habitat create a framework of relationships for other organisms. And you become part of those relationships because planting native, you will have a different relationship from your garden and your design of that garden than you would, I think, a normal garden because it's not just a garden. When you choose a native plant. You are choosing those organisms that use it. So if you like certain butterflies, plant for those butterflies and they will show up. Those native plant gardens enhance connectivity and complexity in the landscape. And so in your design, you want to do layers of complexity. You know, start simple with your trees first, and then start adding those shrubby layers. Decide where you want that rain garden or swale so that you can get moisture going into the ground. And then moisture gets shared underground with different things. And you can save moisture by using rocks as accents in the garden, leaving piles of leaves where moisture will remain, and those roots will grow towards the moisture. So as a result of this sort of complexity and the layered approach here in your design, you'll have reduced irrigation needs because you're saving moisture with these leaves and rocks and the community of plants sharing resources. That leads to less water use, which is what we want in our gardens. So it's so counterintuitive. Less water use doesn't mean less plants. Sometimes I see these gardens where it's nothing but gravel with a couple of agaves sticking out. It doesn't have to be like that. As you add more plants, you will build a community of plants and other organisms that support each other and share water, nutrients, and information. And when you add the right plants, the garden becomes a self-assembling living system. So what started out maybe something initially simple becomes more complex over time. And you know what? With those keystone species, they will do the heavy lifting for you. They will make it complex for you because they have complexity built in as an attribute. And then after you planted your keystone species, add more plant species each year. Go crazy. So, because imagine building a house. You know, once the keystone plant species are in, they are like the load-bearing walls. They are essential for the structure and the stability. And then once the walls are in place, then you can add other components like floors, doors, and windows, representing the various plant and animal species that the habitat supports. Personally, I'm a sucker for pink flowers. So these are wonderful bulbs that do not want to be watered at all during the summer. So you want to put these plants in with plants that don't get water in the summertime. If they get water in the summer, they will rot. So you want to group your plants together in terms of like how much water they're using. And Calscape tells you whether things are like super low water use, medium, and so forth. You want to put all those things that are how much water they use in areas together. So in terms of weaving in complexity, you can have your shrubs providing actual physical structure to weave in other things. So like I said, I love a pink flower. So over time, I add more plants, Lathyrus fastidius, the Pacific pea, weaving strands of beautiful complexity among the Carpentaria californica hedge in my home garden. This is blooming right now with white flowers, so makes a great substitute for camellias. They look very camellia-like. And actually, the thing about native plants is there's generally a substitute very similar looking to non-native plants. So, um, you know, there's almost always something that you can put in that will do the job a little bit better than a non-native. A design tip, remember, we're going to mimic nature. So for a lush look, I'm giving you all my design secrets here. Use succulents that don't go as dormant and mix those in with dark colored evergreen plants. And so here we have sedum, which is a cute little evergreen, and an Arctostaphylos ground cover. These work great together. And what this does in terms of design is you end up with contrast. So contrast is one of those things that draws your eye. So you can get beautiful contrast between something that's similar in kind of texture here. So we've got kind of rounded leaves here, but then they contrast beautifully in terms of their color, but they're still shades of green. So here's another design tip in terms of using contrast. Now remember how we had light green and dark green. So I've kind of mimicked that, which was growing in the wild here in the Arctis, in the Embarcadero Road Pollinator Corridor Project. So we have featured here Arctostaphylos edmundsii Carmel Sur, which is super low water use. I don't think these got watered at all during the summer, the last couple of summers. And in between, we have Corythnogyne phylogenifolia. So instead of the sedum, we planted this. This is a cute pink flower. And so you end up with this nice sort of defined tapestry effect growing along um, and growing these nice masses of plants. They fill in these areas. They stay nice and low, which is a requirement here in the Parkway Strip. Super low maintenance. The only thing that we really do here is weed. Another design tip here for you, and I'm giving, yes, again, my design secrets here. So a thing that happens in good design is where you have a harmonious composition. And harmony can be achieved when you have some common qualities between different things, like a similar color, a similar texture. If two different things share a very similar quality, then they're harmonious. So, for example, in this composition, the similar shades of blue we have a Ceanothus Kurt Zadnik here. Look at that color. And the lavender bloom of Salvia, Dara's Choice, creating this color harmony in the Embarcadero Road Pollinator Corridor Project. So imagine in your town, if there are these parkway strips and you want to recreate what we're doing here in Palo Alto, there are some great choices that can be these beautiful garden walks that can continue for miles down these roadways. So this is how you create a harmonious composition. Another design tip, this is the Primrose Way Garden. I just took this picture a couple of days ago, where you plant in large masses for that visual effect. So planting in masses that are at least 3 feet in diameter to get that effect. Um, One thing in design, consider how the light in either the early morning or the late afternoon, that golden hour. Look when the plants are backlit, when it's the sunlight is coming through the leaves and the blooms. And so here's the primrose garden in the afternoon with the light coming through the cherry trees that were already existing there, which we just left. But then we have an annual here, Phacelia tanacidifolia, that reseeds itself every year. And it has these very lacy flowers. It's also actually called lacy phacelia. And so it's like this backlit lace. Very pretty. Another design tip, um, here we have color contrast, um, as well as a light dark contrast for visual interest. So we've got annual Lea platyglossa, the tidy tips, contrasting with blue Phacelia campanularia, creating a warm, cool contrast. So you can get these color harmonies going. But these are personal choices. What do you like? Maybe you don't want blue and yellow. So a lot of different choices, but just really beautiful compositions that you can create. The water conservation superpower, all of these plants, all this beauty, and you get water conservation on top of it. It's like the cherry on top. Biological connections in the water cycle. Remember those animals are eating those plants, and those animals are taking that moisture and putting it into their bodies. So plants and animals storing the water in those living tissues and moving it through the environment using various processes. So you have, in addition to rain gardens and water barrels, another tool in our water conservation toolkit are the native plants and those organisms that use the plants. So you have biological water storage in addition to these other methods. Remember, native plant superpower, transferring the moisture into these other organisms for other organisms to use. So what are the implications? And so, because when your native plants are food, and who doesn't like to eat, the native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects. So you want to use best practices to help these organisms complete their life cycles. You don't want to kill them after they've shown up in your garden. And so some things that happen, your gardens will attract birds. You want to make sure that your windows are safe for birds. So go to the American Bird Conservancy to get ideas to decrease bird strikes. Bird strikes are when they try to fly into windows because they see reflections of trees and things. They think that's a place to land. This is a good website for some suggestions. Also, you want to uh, reduce light pollution at night because, again, your plants are going to be very attractive to those moth species. And for every species of butterfly on the planet, there are 19 species of moths, which we're not aware of because they come out at night. And so light pollution harms those animals using your habitat. So reduce light pollution by using motion sensing, warm color outdoor lights like a yellow light, and blackout fabric in your curtains to reduce light pollution. Some of your best practices, they're less maintenance than a non-native garden than a lawn. You basically kind of want to just leave it alone. Um, and basically your most work that you will do is weeding. When you first plant during the planting season, during the winter, you may not have to water at all if we've had some good rains, but if you're needing to water, irrigate the plants to establish them about once a week. Irrigation should encourage the roots to search for water, infrequent but deep watering just outside the root ball. Prune sparingly and to control dried up dead fire material for fire safety. You don't need to fertilize, amend sparingly, and we can talk about heavy clay soil because that is a thing that people have a problem with. What I like to do is don't wait to prepare your soil for planting if you have heavy clay soil. Right now is a good time to pile the mulch on top of that heavy clay and then plant this winter when the mulch has broken down and softened up that soil for you. Mulch to control weeds initially and help to establish the plant. Then mulch with those leaves, because remember, those leaves that the plants drop is their own fertilizer. If you don't like the way that looks, you can do the skim coat of wood chips on top. Leave bare dirt for nests because 70% of native bees, which we have like 1,600 species in California, nest underground. Don't use leaf blowers in planted areas. Again, we want to have things complete their life cycles. Don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. Leaves as mulch. Again, I'm not going to go into this too much, but leaves encourage fungal decomposition. And so one of those great gifts that I get in the garden is this. This is a fungus called Pizolithus tinctorius, otherwise known as the Bohemian truffle. There's a little Arctostaphylos there. And the mycorrhiza get in there and they wrap around the roots. Sometimes they invade the roots and they share nutrients with the plants. The mycorrhiza pull up various minerals and they get carbohydrates that the plant makes. And so it's a symbiosis, a beneficial relationship. And so whenever I get one of these in the garden, it's a good thing. And so again, this is forming a relationship with this plant, but it's also forming a relationship with me because I harvest them in the gardens. Like I said, your relationship will change with your garden. And so we leave the leaves in our gardens, plant seedlings, grow right up through the leaves. Not an issue for seedlings. They want to live, they will come up through leaf litter. Leaves, again, ecosystem gold, providing that foundation of life. So leave your leaves, do less work. And our native plant gardens create dynamic beauty. And the gardens will change over time. The garden that you start with is not going to be the garden that is there every year. Everything is going to be changing, getting bigger. You're going to add more plants. You're going to see different organisms coming in over time. So among those wonderful things provided when you plant native plants, in addition to their water conservation superpower, is that you're providing opportunities and resources for organisms to complete their life cycles. And so you want to allow time for biological processes to take place. And this video is over at the Hopkins Avenue Garden. We have two Ackman blue butterflies doing a mating dance next to Eriogonum latifolium, the coastal buckwheat that they lay their eggs on. So this is what you get to see when you plant native, when you design a native garden, when you use those, there's so many benefits. And another cherry on top of the sundae is that you get to see the love that is created. So, um, it's just a joy to see things like this. Um, leave leaf litter in place. Again, bumblebees, the queens overwinter in leaf piles, and you can read more about what they do at the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. Queens live underground here. Here at the Gwynda Street Garden, I saw this um, yellow-faced bumblebee queen, and they're pretty big. And she's looking in the oak leaf litter that's there that we leave in place because she's looking for a place to hang out um, and create a new nest. So pruning, um, I like to decide what to prune based on using observation. What species do you see using these resources? When are they using these resources? I try not to prune if I can absolutely help it. Male bees will take naps and hang on to stems, dried up stems, so they can just like catch a few Z's in between searching for the ladies. So, look to see what are the organisms doing. They're going to use the plants, um, and a lot of stems are hollow. A lot of insects like to nest in stems. Bee species, wasp species, other things are stem nesters. And, so we like to leave a few piles of stems in place if we do cut them down, or we don't prune until really late in the season when the stems are breaking down. Um, Stems with seed heads are really important for birds and insects. We also provide places for shelter and nesting, and complexity in a habitat garden is super important. So I use bamboo stakes in my garden, and I was very surprised to see this leafcutter female come out of one of my garden stakes, because that's where she's laying her nest, egg on top of egg on top of egg. Um, and uh, I see something new every time, and I wasn't expecting this. It was really a surprise. She's looking at me like, "Who are you? What are you doing?" But we're just magic. Again, leave the seed heads, for months, and the birds will eat the seeds over time, and they appreciate a nice stable source of food. Um, and I like to leave fluffy heads on the flowers that are left over. So don't be in a rush to, again, don't be in a rush to prune. This is goldenrod here that has a kind of a fluff left over. And I was actually out this very day that I caught this video. I was going to cut this down, and not knowing, again, I need to like emphasize observation is key. She's actually harvesting the fluff to use in her nest in January. I did not know that hummingbirds start nesting in January. So I did not cut this down until probably June. So the stems were breaking down. I figured it was safe. So, you know, really pay attention to what's using your garden. Like I said, the relationship with your garden will change over time. So some final thoughts. As your understanding of how planting California natives helps the environment, saving that water, so does your ability to optimize the power of your native plant garden, leading to an abundance of life, as well as enhancing your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. Don't be afraid to just go out there and plant some things. You're going to create beauty. It's going to be a beautiful, beautiful garden. No, almost no matter what you plant, you cannot do it wrong. Um, don't be afraid, dive in, almost 8,000 species to choose from. And, uh, you know, you'll find that there is so much joy and beauty in this that um, water conservation, lower bills, nice fragrances, and that's just you'll find that that's just the beginning of your enjoyment. And with that, I'd be happy to uh, take any sorts of questions that anybody might have. I know it's a lot in terms of design, so I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have. And yes, I know I spelled stable wrong in that one last slide. So I'm not seeing anybody having questions in the chat. No questions? Michaela, I think you're still muted here. There you go.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, you could raise your hand or type in the chat.
Ah, specific species you need plant multiples for cross-pollination. That's an excellent question. So I did mention the hazelnut, which whenever you're looking to get fruit, that's when you want to have at least two planted. So uh, the ones that I have multiple species of that I like, there is a variety of the native currant, Ribes aureum variety gracillum, which is the golden currant, and that has some of the tastiest fruit. So I have like three in my home garden planted in a clump together. There are two at the Hopkins Avenue garden that cross-pollinate each other. That just gives you more fruit. Um, I mean, they're self uh, fertile, so they can fertilize themselves, but having two will give you more. Um, there's just, I don't know, they can share genes and do what they need to. So the answer to that is what species do you want to get some fruit from? And if you want to grow hazelnuts, two is better than one. Wild grape, same thing. Having two will give you more wild grapes. And wild grapes make an excellent plant to espalier on a fence. And so um, the wild grapes are a little bit seedy, but boy, they just feed a lot of organisms and they can go into a really narrow area. So those make a great plant to go in on a fence. But yeah, so it's basically, what do you want to achieve with the cross pollination? Do you want more fruit? So yes, that's an excellent question.
Any other questions?
I would also recommend Palo Alto is doing an Earth Day fair tomorrow at the Rinconada Library from 1 until 4. I will be there. We will have people stationed at some of our pollinator gardens because we have like a little walking tour of those to do the Primrose, Hopkins, Winda Street Garden, and the Corridor Project sort of loop around the library. There'll be about 25 different groups there. I'll be giving away some succulents, and I've got some buckeye trees that another gardener friend gave me. So I'm trying to give away a bunch of plants. Um, and there'll be some other great groups there with their own particular giveaways as well. So it should be fun. If you want to see some of these plants right now, the gardens here in Palo Alto are looking quite spectacular. April is peak bloom month. We have quite the super bloom going on. So come out and see the plants. It's really something right now.
Well, all right. Thank you so much, Juanita, for this very informational presentation today. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.